Hello. Happy Wednesday. January 25th. Oh boy. Getting close to the end of the first month of the year, everybody. How is it going? Happy Year of the Rabbit. Year of the Rabbit, Ben. Water? Water rabbit, is that right? Or kitty, if you were in one of like 3 places. You want a treat? You want a treat? You want a treat? You want a treat? You really want a treat. Well, you couldn't mistake a sheep with a goat, could you? And lay down. What a cute papa. Possibly too cute. Oh. I feel like I am sleeping okay these days, this week. Like I'm falling asleep, before midnight and I'm waking up around 8. But I need to figure out how to get some energy. Apparently just caffeine's not doing it. And sleep. Row, row, row. I say. Row, 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 row. Meow and meow. 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 And also seems pretty sleepy today. This evening, anyways. Are you a monkey? Are you a little monkey? We need to give him a brusha probably before Friday so that we can curb some of his fur spreading. Real close. Especially now that, at least for the moment, it sounds like our party might be reduced to Garion, Silk, and Belgarath. I would not be surprised if this one cropped up real soon. I'm sure we're going to get an itchy bearded Belgarath soon. Hey Sharkies, where you at? Are you here? Are you just about to pop in and say, "We're here"? I'm sleepy. I like how Silk was like, "Alright, you better tell me what's going on," and Belgrath was like, "Okay, so the prophecy speaks to Garion." And Silk was like, "Okay, I'll allow it." Just Mr. Sharky. Hello. How are you? How are you tonight? Look at that sleepy pup. Me too, Bin. I also a sleepy pup. Look at that hungry pup. Finally restoring your kitchen to post-family dinner status. So the family dinner finally occurred. You finally were able to do the Christmas dinner. Hanging his chin off the step. How was it? Was it delicious? Did everything turn out well? It was great that you made more pierogies than you needed. Pierogi. Anytime I see the word pierogi spelled in that particular way, it makes me think of Men in Black, the first, the first movie, where at some point some aliens are having lunch and they're like gonna order pierogies. Just the way that they say it. Because I think they're speaking in an alien language at the time or something. Though it's been a while since I've watched it, so I might be remembering details wrong. Well, I guess if you have a lot of extras, you could always freeze them for later or something, right? Probably. Yeah, that guy. The guy that actually has the galax or the that gives the key advice. The galaxy is in Orion's. But, but, but. So, there you usually are frozen after assembly. Should we continue reading without misses, or should we find something else to occupy our evening with? Well, there's the other method of spelling it. Pierogies. Yeah, we don't have them very often because if we want them, we have to hunt down gluten-free, which do exist. I feel like we used to have them more frequently. Like back when we lived in Langley, I feel like we made them a lot more regularly there. Though we've never made them by hand, we always just buy frozen ones, and that's true. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, you can get them in pretty hefty bags. I assume that Mr. Sharkey is talking about preparing them from scratch. So, yeah. Should we read? Should we make our way into part 3 of Castle of Wizardry, or should we. We usually boil them and then fry them. Because just boiling them, they end up kind of mushy. So usually boil them and then fry them to make them a little crispy. Oh, I see. Yeah, I prefer them to be a little crispy on the outside. Not like too much, but So in chapter 16, Garion and the Princess Sinedra had their first kiss, which is not actually Garion's first kiss, was it? I think Garion's first kiss, well, okay. Garion, I think, probably had some kisses from Zubret back in Pawn of Prophecy. And then there was also the blonde Cherek girl during the sledding incident. So I think that Garion's probably had a few kisses before now. Then after that, or sometime around then, Garion was involved in a war meeting where he found out that this wasn't going to be a, march off, have a couple battles, and then a big giant battle, and then war done. This was going to be a fighting across country, millions of people dying for decades. While depleting the resources of everybody, and yeah, it wasn't going to be a good time. But then he got directed by the voice in his head to go and read a certain prophecy, and had it pointed out that really the whole objective here wasn't war, it was the battle between the child of light and child of dark, being Garion and Torak. It's got to be a little daunting to be told that your counterpart, who you need to fight to the death, is a god. But anyway, so Garion sort of pieced together that, well, if the whole point is for the two of them to fight and it's going to happen one way or another, then you might as well just avoid as much of the war side of things as possible and just get straight to that one duel. He also confronted Olban, the youngest son of Brand, because as it turns out, that was our would-be assassin. Nice to wrap that little story up before we departed from Riva. Olban really wanted to, basically it turned out that according to Olban, the whole reason that anything happened was because he felt like his father had been the one that was in charge, and then Garion showed up and knocked his father off of his throne. Olban didn't like that. But then didn't want to humiliate his father, and so begged to be able to end his own life, to which Garion said, let's just forget the whole thing happened, take the dagger in this cloth and go chuck him in the sea and pretend it never happened, and no theatrics. Yeah, had a look at the Marin Codex, and then had a talk with Mr. Wolf and Mr. Silk, and they decided that the three of them were gonna slip out of the Citadel that evening and go on their own little adventure. Oh, truck horn out there. Which makes me think that we're going to get a couple of bingo squares pretty soon. That's where we left off. right there. You can see the map through that page like veins. So, Mr. Sharky, what do you think? Should we actually get into part 3 tonight, or should we leave that for another evening and find something else to occupy our time with tonight? Draznian Moors, border with Cherak, the Gulf of Cherak. Ambar of Kotu, apparently that's where Ambar comes from, one of Silk's aliases. And Boktor, right there in the middle of some rivers. I'm sure they get a lot of trade in Boktor. North Caravan route leading from Boktor. Which is interesting that there's that North Caravan route that doesn't run too far from parallel with the North Marin River. I mean, that doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense, does it? Why would you take the caravan route if you could just take the river? I mean, they probably lead to different places, but still. Ah. Oh, that reminds me. Friday, I'm going to not be doing a stream. We're having some work done in our house on Friday that is going to conflict most likely with the timing, so it's just going to be tonight this week, and then as of next week, our house is going to be back on the market, which means we're going to be back in that situation of we might have to do some last minute cancellations if we have house viewings or what have you. We're hoping that the housing market will pick up enough for us to be able to sell a little more painlessly. Hopefully. So yeah, one stream this week, and then hopefully back to normal for next week, but it's going to depend on how things go. I don't know for certain whether or not next Wednesday and Friday will be as normal. Well, I think I'm going to get into it, but I'm also a bit sleepy tonight. So I'm just going to. The first chapter is quite short. It's only like 6 pages ish. So we'll read that anyways. Which is chapter 17. Ready? Ready, puppy? Licking your chops? Dear Aunt Pole, Garion's note began. I know this is going to make you angry. You think? I'm sure it'll be fine. I know this is going to make you angry. But there's no other way. I've seen the Marin Codex, and now I know what I have to do. The... He broke off, frowning. How do you spell prophecy? He asked. Belgarath spelled it out for him. Don't drag it out too much, Garion, the old man advised. Nothing you say is going to make her happy about this, so stick to the point. Don't you think I ought to explain why we're doing this? Garion fretted. She's read the Codex, Garion, Belgarath replied. She'll know why without your explanation. I really ought to leave a note for Sinedra, too, Garion considered. Polgara can tell her what she needs to know, Belgarath said. Is he trying to sabotage their relationship? We have things to do, and we can't afford to spend the whole night on correspondence. I've never written a letter before, Garion remarked. It's not nearly as easy as it looks. Just say what you have to say and then stop, the old man advised. Don't labor at it so much. The door opened, and Silk came back in. He was dressed in the nondescript clothing he had worn on the road, and he carried 2 bundles. I think these should fit you, he said, handing one of the bundles to Belgarath and the other to Garion. Did you get the money? The old man asked him. I borrowed some from Barak. That's surprising, Belgarath replied. He isn't notorious for generosity. I didn't tell him I was borrowing it, the little man returned with a broad wink. I thought it would save time if I didn't have to go into long explanations. One of Belgarath's eyebrows shot up. We are in a hurry, aren't we? Silk asked with an innocent expression. And Barak can be tedious when it comes to money. Spare me the excuses, Belgarath told him. He turned back to Garion. Have you finished with that yet? What do you think? Garion asked, handing him the note. The old man glanced at it. Good enough, he said. Now sign it, and we'll put it where somebody'll find it sometime tomorrow. Late tomorrow? Silk suggested. I'd like to be well out of Polgara's range when she finds out that we've left. Garion signed the note, folded it, and wrote, For Lady Polgara, across the outside. We'll leave it on the throne, Belgarath said. Let's change clothes and go get the sword. Isn't the sword going to be a bit bulky? Silk asked after Garion and Belgarath had changed. There's a scabbard for it in one of the antechambers, Belgarath answered, opening the door carefully and peering out into the silent hall. He'll have to wear it slung across his back. That glow is going to be a bit ostentatious, Silk said. We'll cover the orb, Belgarath replied. Let's go. The 3 of them slipped out into the dimly lighted corridor and crept through the midnight stillness toward the throne room. Once, a sleepy servant going toward the kitchen almost surprised them, but an empty chamber provided them with a temporary hiding place until he had passed. Then they moved on. Is it locked? Silk whispered when they reached the door to the hall of the Raven King. Garion took hold of the large handle and twisted, wincing as the latch clacked loudly in the midnight stillness. He pushed, and the door creaked as it swung open. "You ought to have somebody take care of that," Silk muttered. The orb of Aldor began to glow faintly as soon as the three of them entered the hall. "It seems to recognize you," Silk observed to Garion. When Garion took down the sword, the orb flared, filling the hall of the Raven King with its deep blue radiance. Garion looked around nervously, fearful that someone passing might see the light and come in to investigate. "Stop that!" he irrationally admonished the stone. With a startled flicker, the glow of the orb subsided into a faint, pulsating light, and the triumphant song of the orb stilled to a murmur. Belgarath looked quizzically at his grandson, but said nothing. He led them to an antechamber and removed a long, plain scabbard from a case standing against the wall. The belt attached to the scabbard had seen a certain amount of use. Interesting that the sword of the Raven King, like one of the most legendary weapons in this entire world, presumably, just has a plain scabbard. Not, ornately detailed or anything like that. Just plain. The belt attached to the scabbard had seen a certain amount of use. The old man buckled it in place for Garion, passing it over the young man's right shoulder and down across his chest, so that the scabbard, attached to the belt in two places, rode diagonally down his back. "Oh, Sharky's gonna like this." There was also a knitted tube in the case, almost like a narrow sock. "Slide this over the hilt," Belgarath instructed. "There's your club cozy." I like how it's knitted. Oh boy. Garion covered the hilt of his great sword with the tube, and then took hold of the blade itself, and carefully inserted the tip into the top of the scabbard. It was awkward, and neither Silk nor Belgarath offered to help him. All three of them knew why. The sword slid home, and, since it seemed to have no weight, it was not too uncomfortable. The crosspiece of the hilt, however, stood out just at the top of his head, and tended to poke him if he moved too quickly. "It wasn't really meant to be worn," Belgarath told him. "We had to improvise." Once again, the three of them passed through the dimly lighted corridors of the sleeping palace and emerged through a side door. Silk slipped on ahead, moving as soundlessly as a cat and keeping to the shadows. Belgarath and Garion waited. An open window, perhaps 20 feet overhead, faced out into the courtyard. As they stood together beneath it, a faint light appeared, and the voice that spoke down to them was very soft. "Errand?" it said. "Yes," Garion replied without thinking. "Everything's all right. Go back to bed." Belgarian, the child said, with a strange kind of satisfaction. Then he added, "Goodbye," in a somewhat more wistful tone, and he was gone. Is that the first non-errand word we've heard him say?
Let's hope he doesn't run straight to Polgara,
Belgarath muttered. I think we can trust him, Grandfather. He knew we were leaving, and he just wanted to say goodbye.
Would you like to explain how you know that?
I don't know, Garion shrugged. I just do. Silk whistled from the courtyard gate, and Belgarath and Garion followed him down into the quiet streets of the city. It was still early spring, and the night was cool but not chilly. Cool but not chilly. That's very precise. There was a fragrance in the air, washing down over the city from the high meadows in the mountains behind Riva, and mingling with peat smoke and the salty tang of the sea. The stars overhead were bright, and the newly risen moon, looking swollen as it rode low over the horizon, cast a glittering golden path across the breast of the Sea of the Winds. Garion felt that excitement he always experienced when starting out at night. He had been cooped up too long, and each step that took him farther and farther from the dull round of appointments and ceremonies filled him with an almost intoxicating anticipation.
It's good to be on the road again,
Belgarath murmured, as if reading his thoughts. Is it always like this? Garion whispered back. I mean, even after all the years that you've been doing it.
Always,
Belgarath replied.
Why do you think I prefer the life of a vagabond?
They moved on down through the dark streets to the city gate, and out through a small sally port to the wharves jutting into the moon-dappled waters of the harbor. Captain Greldick, of course, was a bit drunk when they reached his ship, of course. The vagrant seaman had ridden out the winter in the safety of the harbor at Riva. His ship had been hauled out onto the strand, her bottom scraped and her seams recocked. Her mainmast, which had creaked rather alarmingly on the voyage from Sandaria, had been reinforced and fitted with new sails. Then, Greldick and his crew had spent much of their time carousing. The effects of 3 months of steady dissipation showed on his face when they woke him. Hey, Kuroneko Akuma! I'm doing well, how are you? We're just reading Castle of Wizardry. I don't know why, I always jumble up these two titles. We're reading Castle of Wizardry, which is the 4th out of 5 books of this series. And our young hero is slipping out onto a new adventure. And Puppy has come to say hello. I do Wednesdays and Fridays at, this time. Started about 40 minutes ago. Whatever that is, your local time. Boop, boop. Though I won't be here this coming Friday. I've seen you go live a couple of times. Oh. I am a little sleepy this evening, so I'm not going to be on for too long tonight. What's new? What have you been streaming? Oh, comfy puppy. Ready to hear some more? Alright, where were we? Captain Greldick's eyes were bleary, and there were dark-stained pouches under them. His bearded face looked puffy and unwell. Schoolwork for math. Ugh, math. Blech. I don't envy you that. Alright, let's see. Captain Greldick.
Maybe tomorrow,
He grunted when Belgrath told him of their urgent need to leave the island.
or the next day. The next day would be better, I think.
Belgarath spoke more firmly. Oh boy, business management. I don't know if I specifically I took some business communication courses in college. And some micro and macroeconomics courses as well.
My sailors couldn't possibly man the oars.
Greldick objected.
They'll be throwing up all over the deck, and it takes a week to clean up a mess like that.
Yeah. Belgarath delivered a blistering ultimatum, and Greldick sullenly climbed out of his rumpled bunk. Rumpled bunk. I don't know why, it's just funny to say. Try saying it 10 times fast. Rumpled bunk, lump, blah. Rumpled bunk, rumpled bunk, rumpled bunk, rumpled bunk, blah, blah, blah. Rumpled bunk. Bunk. What have you been playing? Oh boy. Rumpled bunk. Bunch of rumpled bunk. Stilt. Rumpelstiltskin. I know, like, it's a weird name, and based on the story, I'd say it's supposed to be intentionally weird. I wonder where that name came from. It's an old fairy tale, Rumpelstiltskin. When you say from Once Upon a Time, do you mean the show? Because I used to live in Storybrooke. My apartment was like just down the street from their main, like, where a lot of the buildings were for Storybrooke. I've never actually watched the show, but there was the gold, like the gold shop, whatever, and the bakery. Yeah, Steveston in Richmond. Mm-hmm. It was funny living there because you could, like, for people that were big fans of the show, going to Steveston was kind of like a pilgrimage, I think, and you could tell, like, you could spot the Once Upon a Time fans from like a mile away, because of where they would be. They'd be taking a picture of the post office or or the bakery or whatever, and just like so excited. It was also in You have very spicy dooley books? What's a dooley book? Drooly books, I see. If you think it's something that you're interested in doing, you should definitely give it a go. There's it's fun for me to do this. I enjoy reading and talking about the books with everyone, but there's definitely also challenges with it, especially when you get into series like this, because I think a lot of people, pop in, but they aren't there from the beginning of the book, and so it's weird to come in the middle of a book, right? Um, so I don't know if it's necessarily ever going to be the most popular content, as it were. Um, so if I were trying to like amass viewers, then I would probably pick something else to do. Oh, we've got a Rumpelstiltskin. The literal meaning of the name Rumpelstiltskin, Rumpelstiltskin in the Grimm's German version, is Little Rattle Stilt from Rumpelstilt, a goblin that was rumored to make noises by rattling posts or stilts. Like a sort of poltergeist. Interesting. Was Rumpelstiltskin the one that wove the straw into gold? It's been a while since I've heard the full. So it was the girl needed straw woven into gold, right? Maybe like there was a king involved. She was locked up with a bunch of straw for some reason, and she needed to weave it into gold, and then Rumpelstiltskin came along, and was it that he would do it for something precious in exchange unless she could guess his name, in which case that was it, or something like that? There's always a king involved. And then I think she had like 3 guesses or something, maybe over like 3 nights, and I'm pretty sure she got the first 2 guesses wrong. But then for some reason she overheard him saying his own name, which seems real clumsy. And then that's how she got it, which is a little like she didn't guess his name; she overheard it. But that's what I remember of the fairy tale. But it has been a very long time since I've properly heard it told or read it anywhere. Mm. Okay. Let's see. Sailors throwing up all over the deck. And Greldick sullenly climbed out of his rumpled bunk, which is what started this whole mess. They turned Rumpelstiltskin into the beast. That's interesting. So, Captain Greldick lurched toward the crew's quarters, pausing only long enough to be noisily sick over the rail. And then he descended into the forward hold, where with kicks and curses he roused his men. The moon was high and dawn only a few hours off when Greldick's ship slid quietly out of the harbor and met the long, rolling swells of the Sea of the Winds. When the sun came up, they were far out at sea. The weather held fair, even though the winds were not favorable, and in 2 days' time Greldick dropped Geryon, Silk, and Belgarath off on a deserted beach just north of the mouth of the Selene River on the northwest coast of Sandaria.
I don't know that I'd be in all that big a hurry to go back to Riva,
Belgarath told Greldick as he stepped out of the small boat onto the sand of the beach. He handed the bearded Cherrick a small pouch of jingling coins.
I'm sure you and your crew can find a bit of a diversion somewhere. It's always nice in Kamar this time of year,
Greldick mused, bouncing the pouch thoughtfully in his hand.
And I know a young widow there who's always been very friendly. You ought to pay her a visit,
Belgarath suggested.
You've been away for quite some time, and she's sure to have been terribly lonely for you. I think maybe I will,
Greldick said, his eyes suddenly bright.
Have a good trip.
He motioned to his men, and they began rowing the small boat back toward the lean ship standing a few hundred yards offshore. What was that all about? Geryon asked.
I'd like to get a bit of a distance between us and Polgara before she gets her hands on Greldick,
the old man replied.
I don't particularly want her chasing us.
He looked around.
Let's see if we can find somebody with a boat to row us upriver to Selene. We should be able to buy horses and supplies there.
He's really trying to ditch Polgara. Did they explain that? Why specifically? Not really. Yeah, they didn't really explain why. You doing okay there, Pop? Are you starving and need snackums? Such a soft puppy. Never ever. Alright, let's see. He looked around.
Let's see if we can find somebody with a boat to row us upriver to Selene. We should be able to buy horses and supplies there.
Yeah, it was basically age and experience with Belgarath. Those two are frequently the navigators wherever they're going, so, you know, Silk knows his way almost anywhere, and where he doesn't know his way, for instance, Meloria, Belgarath does. He also knows things like the prophecy and whatnot pretty well inside and out. Okay. A fisherman, who immediately saw that turning ferry boatmen would provide a more certain profit than trusting his luck on the banks of the northwest coast, agreed to take them upriver. By the time the sun was setting, they had arrived in the city of Selene. You know what you're going to stream now? What are you going to stream now? They spent the night in a comfortable inn and went the following morning to the central market. Silk negotiated the purchase of horses, haggling down to the last penny, bargaining more out of habit, Garion thought, than out of any real necessity. Ah, Ghost of Tsushima. That's a great game. I haven't beaten it, but I did get pretty well into at least the, like, upper half of the continent. Yeah. Let's see. They bought supplies for the trip. By mid-morning, they were pounding along the road that led toward Doreen, some 40 leagues distant. Do we have these places? They were... Are they still in... This is still in Sandaria. It's not going to be on our map. Yeah. The fields of northern Sandaria had begun to sprout that first green blush that lay on damp earth like a faint jade mist, and more than anything announced spring. Starting from the beginning. Well, it's a good start to the game as well. Yeah, it's such a pretty game. A few fleecy clouds scampered across the blue of the sky, and, though the wind was gusty, the sun warmed the air. The road opened before them, stretching across the verdant fields, and though their mission was deadly serious, Garion almost wanted to shout out of pure exuberance. In 2 more days they reached Doreen. Do you want to take the ship here? No, do you want to take ship here? Silk asked Belgarath as they crested the hill up which they had come so many months before with their 3 wagon loads of turnips. We could be in Kotu inside a week. Oh, and here we are. Belgarath scratched at his beard, looking out at the expanse of the Gulf of Cherek glittering in the afternoon sun. Knew this was going to show up soon. Belgarath scratches his beard, everybody. What? Which puts us 2 off of the I column as well. Though some of these feel a lot less likely now that the party has been split. What is it, puppy? You trying to rush me? Or do you just want more snacks? Belgarath scratched at his beard, looking out at the expanse of the Gulf of Cherek, glittering in the afternoon sun.
I don't think so,
he decided. He pointed at several lean Cherek warboats patrolling just outside Sandarian territorial waters. The Chereks are always moving around up there, Silk replied. It might have nothing whatsoever to do with us.
Polgara's very persistent, Belgarath said. She can't leave Riva herself as long as so many things are afoot there. But she can send people out to look for us. Let's avoid any possible trouble if we can. We'll go along the north coast, and then on up through the fens to Boktor.
Silk gave him a look of profound distaste. It'll take a lot longer, he objected.
We aren't in all that great a hurry, Belgarath remarked blandly. The Alorns are beginning to mass their armies, but they still need more time, and it's going to take a while to get the errands all moving in the same direction.
What's that got to do with it? Silk asked him.
I have plans for those armies, and I'd like to start them moving before we cross into Gar Og Nadrak if possible, and certainly before we get to Meloria. We can afford the time it'll take to avoid any unpleasantness with the people Polgara's sent out to find us.
There's a possibility. This change in direction with the story has suddenly put a lot of things up in the air, hasn't it? And so they detoured around Dareen and took the narrow, rocky road that led along the cliffs where the waves crashed and boomed and foamed, beating themselves to fragments against the great rocks of the north coast. The mountains of eastern Sandaria ran down into the Gulf of Cherek along that forbidding shore, and the road, which twisted and climbed and dropped steeply again, was not good. Silk grumbled every mile of the way. Garion, however, had other worries. The decision he had made after reading the Mrin Codex had seemed quite logical at the time, but logic was scant comfort now. He was deliberately riding toward Meloria to face Torak in a duel. The more he thought about it, the more insane it seemed. How could he possibly hope to defeat a god? He brooded about that as they rode eastward along the rocky coast, and his mood became as unpleasant as Silk's. After about a week, the cliffs became lower, and the land more gently rolling. From the top of the last of the eastern foothills, they looked out and saw what appeared to be a vast flat plain, dark green and very damp looking. "Well, there they are," Silk sourly informed Belgarath.
"What's got you so bad-tempered?"
the old man asked him. "One of the main reasons I left Drasnia in the first place was to avoid the possibility of ever being obliged to go anywhere near the fens," Silk replied crisply. "Now you propose to drag me lengthwise through the whole soggy, stinking expanse of them. I'm bitterly disappointed in you, old friend, and it's altogether possible that I'll never forgive you for this." Garion was frowning at the marshland spread out below. "That wouldn't be Drasnia, would it?" he asked. "I thought that Drasnia was farther north."
"It's Algaria, actually,"
Belgarath told him.
"The beginning of Alderfens. Up beyond the mouths of the Uldur River is the Drasnian border. They call it Mrin Marsh up there, but it's all the same swamp. It goes on for another 30 leagues or so beyond Kotu at the mouth of the Mrin River."
"Most people just call it the fens and let it go at that," Silk observed. "Most people have sense enough to stay out of it," he added pointedly.
Quit complaining so much,
Belgrath told him bluntly.
There are fishermen along this coast. We'll buy a boat.
Silk's eyes brightened. We can go up along the coast, then, he suggested.
That wouldn't be very prudent,
Belgrath disagreed.
Not with Enheg's fleet scouring the Gulf of Cherek looking for us.
You don't know that they're looking for us, Silk said quickly.
I know Polgara,
Belgrath answered. I feel that this trip is definitely growing sour on us, Silk grumbled. The fishermen along the marshy coast were a peculiar mix of Algars and Drasnians, close-mouthed and wary of strangers. Their villages were built on pilings driven deep into the marshy earth, and there lingered about them that peculiar odor of long-dead fish that hovers over fishing villages wherever one finds them. The universal constant. It took some time to find a man with a boat he was willing to sell, and even longer to persuade him that 3 horses and a few silver coins beside was a fair price for it. It leaks, Silk declared, pointing at the inch or so of water that had collected in the bottom of the boat as they pulled away from the reeking village.
All boats leak, Silk,
Belgrath replied calmly.
It's the nature of boats to leak. Bail it out.
It'll just fill up again.
Then you can bail it out again. Try not to let it get too far ahead of you.
The fens stretched on interminably, a wilderness of cattails and rushes and dark, slow-moving water. There were channels and streams, and quite frequently small lakes where the going was much easier. The air was humid, and, in the evenings, thick with gnats and mosquitoes. Blech. That's enough reason for me to stay out of the fens. Frogs sang of love all night, greeting spring with intoxicated fervor. Little chirping frogs and great booming bull-voiced frogs as big as dinner plates. Fish leaped in the ponds and lakes, and beaver and muskrats nested on soggy islands. I don't know why. This world has mosquitoes, this world has horses, this world has bears, but for some reason seeing beavers mentioned feels odd. They pulled their way through the confused maze of channels marking the mouths of the Aldur and continued northeasterly in the slowly warming northern spring. After a week or more, they crossed the indeterminate border and left Algaria behind. A false channel put them aground once, and they were obliged to climb out to heave and push their boat off a mud bank by main strength. When they were afloat again, Silk sat disconsolately on the gunwale, regarding his ruined boots that were dripping thick mud into the water. When he spoke, his voice was filled with profound disgust. "Delightful," he said. "How wonderful to be home again in dear old mucky Drasnia." Whew. Silk is unhappy. That felt pretty sarcastic. That felt like one of those every word means the opposite of what he said. But, I don't know, I feel like we should save that for when Mrs. Sharkey is here. Dear old mucky Drasnia. That sounded yummy. Yeah. Benedict. Well, it wasn't the longest chapter, but we still stretched it out to like an hour. But I don't think I'm going to read much more tonight because I'm a bit sleepy and I don't want to give Mrs. Sharkey too much to catch up on. So much death in one game. Have you started? Oh, you have started. Well, if I'm done here, then why doesn't everybody come and watch Kuroneko play some Ghost of Tsushima? Which is, as we have mentioned, a very pretty game. So I'm gonna do that. So yeah. Just a reminder, I will not be here on Friday, but hopefully, unless there's a house showing, I should be here next Wednesday. So have a good rest of your week, have a good weekend, and yeah, I'll see you in a whole week's time. Yeah, alright. Have a good night, Sharkies. Go say hi to Kuro over on their channel. Good night.